Now let's move on to part 3. You've been talking about a problem in your city, and I'd like to ask you one or two more questions related to this. So let's consider first of all the development of cities. Could you examine the causes of urbanization?
Well, the causes of urbanization are basically the Industrial Revolution, which started, I suppose, in English cities. But when London's East End started to industrialize, then obviously they need hundreds of thousands of workers to run the factories and the massive infrastructure of the port city, which is London, which for certainly a century or so was one of the busiest ports in the entire world. So the amount of people who had to come from the British countryside or from other countries altogether, often places which had been previously colonized by Britain, these people were all drawn towards the center of industry, and therefore we get two things happening. One is a massive overcrowding, and therefore a likeliness for easily transmitted diseases or just a lack of cleanliness that you might find in a food market with too many rats. But the other side of the problem is so many communities who are entirely different in their culture and outlook, living next door to each other. And sometimes this works very well, but other times we can see eruptions of sporadic violence or malcontent amongst different social groups.
And could you speculate on how cities will develop in the future?
I think cities will probably develop upwards in the same way as we've seen in American cities, that buildings will become taller with better security guards and more windows, so that people can live in the city with the convenience of the local 7-Eleven without having to encounter the chock-a-block street-side life that you will find in any modern metropolis.
Okay, and let's talk about some global issues. Could you describe how noticeable the gap between the rich and the poor is in your country?
Well, yes, it's certainly very noticeable, and I would quote a prominent conservative politician who said, "The homeless, they're the people we step over when we come out of the opera." So in London particularly, and also Manchester and Birmingham, you can really see a lot of people who are sleeping in the street on newspapers, whilst right next to them are extremely wealthy London bankers or Arab oil men, people with chauffeurs, people to carry the back of their coat over the homeless people so as not to tarnish it. So I think it's very obvious the difference between rich and poor, particularly if you go closer to the center of urbanized areas.
And how worried are you about rising world temperatures?
Well, I think it's certainly worrying, the trend of global warming, so-called. Also, in other parts of the world, we'll see global cooling. So it's not simply the idea of I'm worried about temperatures rising. If you look in the center of Canada at the moment, there's a massive cold snap, which is harder than is usually expected at this time of year. So I think that global warming is more complex than perhaps just rising world temperatures. But certainly I'm worried that we have done something to the balance of our world's equilibrium, so to say, that we might not be able to repair.
Thank you. That is the end of the speaking test.